Welcome to Disconnected Earth. Please like, subscribe, comment with your thoughts down below. Why do we have the governments that we have? I mean, if you go around and talk to anybody, I would argue in any country, you will probably notice that everybody hates their government. Nobody likes their government. Everybody thinks they're incompetent or corrupt or and all of the above and more. There's an old saying, a popular saying, which is the people get the government they deserve. And I am a true believer in that. The problem is not that the government is terrible. The problem, in my opinion, is that we do not vote for the governments that we want. So let's say let's talk about the UK. We'll just use the UK. America has got exactly the same problem. I think most of the countries have very much the same problem. But let's focus on the UK, and maybe the US, because at least I know a little bit about that. In the UK, we only have two parties that are really elected all the time, or front runners, and by a big margin. You've got the Tories and Labour. But why is that, right? Why do we only have two parties? And it is this fact that we only have two parties that we keep having the same government, regardless if you vote Tory or Labour. I mean, fair enough, at the moment, the Tories are really, 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 really bad. Even for their own standards, they are like a big pile of shit. But if Labour was in power, I don't think we would see much of a difference currently, right? I mean, and the problem is choice. We don't have a lot of choice, but we blame it on politics that we don't have a choice. We say, well, there's only two parties to choose from, and that's not true. We've got more than enough parties to choose from, but we don't. And here's the reason. The majority of people that I know, at least, or at least anecdotally, seems to me to be voting either traditionally or they vote tactically. And I think the traditional vote is not as dangerous as the tactical vote. If everybody of voting age understood the manifestos of all the different parties that existed, went to the polls and actually put their mark down on the party that they wanted, I don't think we would have this problem. I think we would have more parties at the top. We would have possibly more hung governments, more coalitions. And now you can argue for or against coalitions. I know there's many things to be said about that. But essentially, if you always vote tactically, if you always vote Labour because you don't want the Tories to come in, you ignore that there are other parties that might actually be doing something for you. Now, I don't want to get into the political parties per se, because I don't think that's really what this conversation is all about. This conversation is about that we as a people in general vote the wrong way. If there's a party that you like the manifesto of and their policies of, you should be voting for them, regardless if if tactically it makes more sense to vote for Labour so that the Tories don't come in, because that is exactly why you only have Tories and Labour. When it comes to the big decisions, the big elections, people need to go out and they really need to vote for who they want in power. It does two things. I don't believe that in today's day the majority of people actually really are all just behind either the Tories or Labour. I think there's a lot more people, especially with the younger generations, that are, for example, behind the Greens or whatever other parties exist. But when it comes to voting day, people are so scared, and once they stand there with their little pencil in their hand, they go, "Oh shit, I don't want the Tories to win, so I'll put my mark to Labour. Or I don't want Labour to win, so I'll put my mark on the Conservatives." Instead of just saying, "Well, look, I actually wanted the Greens to win," or I don't know, whatever other party there is. So the voter has a lot to be is guilty here. The government can only do what they voted in for. So the other issue, I think, is just as important, is that we have too little voter turnout. And I think that creates a real issue. Number one, it doesn't really reflect the population. Then you can never say, well, if you've got a general voter turnout for a general election of somewhere between 20 and 30%, it means you don't really, as a government, can say truly that the absolute majority of people voted for me and wants me in power, because the majority of population didn't even come out to vote. Who are allowed to vote, didn't even come out to vote. So yeah, I mean, the election is completely legit. The majority vote went to X or Y, and therefore they have every reason to be in power. But it is, such a big problem that people don't vote. I personally think that voting needs to be mandatory. Every single citizen needs to take, that one little day every 4 or 5 years and say, right, every now and then I need to do something for my country. And, this is a tiny little inconvenience, to take 20 minutes off your day, quickly run down to your local polling station or your voting booth and put your mark down. The Australian system is everybody has to vote. And if they don't vote, they get like a shitty fine of $50 or something stupid. Like, it's like nobody really cares. So if they want to take the day off, it's going to cost them 50 quid. But I think it needs to be a little bit more serious. I think it's so important. We can't have people bitching and moaning about politics all the time, and then at the same time can't even be bothered to go out and vote for the party that they want. I also think it's very important that people are educated properly on the actual manifestos. And not just rhetoric. If you go and you look at the rhetoric of the politicians when it comes to on the run-ups to election, it's just it's just bullshit anyway. I mean, they ramble on all sorts of promises, and then obviously we all know that half the time it doesn't happen. Sometimes there might be legitimate reasons, but most of the time it just seems like they were lying. Okay, so actually understanding the different excuse me. Actually understanding the different manifestos and then voting according to the manifestos, not according to the party's logo or your granny's part in the labor movement or whatever. It should be about you, what you want from your country, and which party comes closest to bringing that for you. So I don't think it's very difficult to actually create a better world. But as a population, what's happening right now is like we're all bitching that the Tories are this and the Tories are that. It's not the Tories' fault. The Tories are Tories. What's this phrase? A leopard doesn't change its spots or whatever. The Tories are Tories. If you let them in power, this is what's going to happen. It's like giving a criminal a gun and dropping him off in front of a convenience store. You know what's going to happen, right? If you allow the Tories to come in, you're going to be fucked as a country. It's as simple as that. So it is the people's doing. Now, you can argue many things. You can argue, well, the politician shouldn't be about to lie, which I completely agree with. People are easily swayed by the media, etc., etc. But that is still the people's fault for letting them being fooled like that. It doesn't take much, especially nowadays, to go a little bit deeper, investigating who a party is and what they've done, and the people that are in power, who they are, what they've done, where their money comes from, who they're in bed with, etc. It doesn't take that much. You can argue that you're bombarded with bullshit news and it creates fake news and all that kind of stuff. But truthfully, it is not impossible to see through it if you spend a little bit of time. If you stop watching shit on TikTok and actually start Googling a little bit more in-depth sources. It is not that hard to actually get to the bottom of a party and who they are and what they do. So my suggestion is that we, as a population, stop this idiotic tactical voting, and we go out and we vote for the party that we want. And we have to do that in mass. It's the only way we are going to get a true reflection of the population in our government. Thanks for listening.